Hey y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing a new series of videos. This will be the first episode, and basically what I want to do in this new series is try out new yarns that I haven't tried before and see how they compare to like my favorite brands that I buy a lot of normally. So today's video will be covering Okey Dokeys Yarn. I ended up ordering a pack of like samples of all the different colors plus some basics for like beginners, so it's like a crochet for beginners pack basically. I ordered that off Amazon. It was a little cheaper than getting like individual skeins. Their skeins normally retail for $8.99, and when I ordered them in this pack it came down to maybe like $5.99 or similar to that, getting this big bundle. So that is why I ended up doing it. It also gives me a good selection of the colors that they offer and allows me to compare to like different colors that different companies offer as well. In addition to the 20 different yarn colors that came in the pack, it came with this little beginner's pack of stitch markers. There's yarn needles and a crochet hook in here. It's a 5.5mm hook, as well as a little sticker of their company's logo. So here is that yarn pack. We've got 20 different skeins in here, all different colors. It's kind of stacked into two here. So we've got these brighter colors on the back, and then in the front we have these colors. Obviously I'm going to take them out and show them to you one by one so you can see the color selection we have, and then I'm going to go ahead and go over the different tests and comparisons I have in mind for this yarn review. Alright, so I've laid them out in the box out of that plastic packaging for y'all so you can get a good look at each of the different colors here. There are 20 colors, like I was saying, in this pack. They are all 1 ounce skeins, I believe. Correction, they're 1.76 ounces skeins, so 50 grams each. So pretty small, like sample size of all of these different colors. On the skein itself, it doesn't have the color name, so unfortunately I won't be able to refer to these as specific color names unless I look them up on their website, which I might end up doing anyway, just so that you can really see what these colors are if you're ordering yourself, if you like one of these colors more than others. Immediately right off the bat, I'm noticing that the yarn is kind of squishy soft instead of that feathery soft that I'm used to when I'm working with my favorite yarn, Premier Parfait Chunky. It's also kind of reminding me of Bernat in a way, just because of the overall look and feel of it. I am noticing there's a bit of a strand poking out here, and it did shed a tiny bit as I was picking at it. Yeah, as you can see, there is a little bit of shedding. It's not super major. It definitely stops after a while, I think. Oh, no, we're still getting a little bit of shedding here. As you can see, I've got some yarn fluff coming out. But it's nice and squishy, kind of like, it reminds me of the Bernat yarn when it comes from like that good manufacturer that makes it like extra soft, instead of sometimes you get like a bad batch from Bernat yarns and they're like a little bit denser and not as soft as others. So this is like a good comparison to the softer Bernat, if not like an in-between between the denser feeling ones and the softer feeling ones. In this pack we have 3 different shades of brown. We have the darkest brown, this is the middle of the road brown, and then this one is almost like a dark tan or khaki color. So there's our 3 shades of brown or tan. Then for whites, we have 2 different options here. They're both not really a true white in my opinion. They're both kind of just like cream colored. This one is a bit darker. I'm not sure if that comes across on camera very well, but it's a little bit more like vanilla bean ice cream flavor colored, and this one is a little bit more light cream color, but neither of them are a true white, and I'm not seeing a true white in this pack either. So I'm actually surprised about that because most brands offer a true white and like a true black, but I'm not seeing that true white color. Here is the selection of yellows to orange. Not really a true orange here either. We've got like more of an autumn, like autumnal orange color, maybe like pumpkin, but not like the carrot orange. We've got a middle of the range orange here, or yellow orange. Kind of comes across as the mustard color from Premier Parfait Chunky. And then this last one here is like almost a butter yellow color. So a nice muted yellow color. Let me grab a comparison here so I can show you this mustard color that I think is pretty close to the Premier Parfait mustard. All right, so here is that Okey Dokeys mustard again, and then this right here is, I don't actually have a skein of mustard by Premier Parfait Chunky right now because I ran out and they've just been out of stock for so long. I actually have one getting shipped to me now, but it's not here yet. So here is that mustard color in Premier Parfait Chunky. It looks a bit shinier and it's honestly a little bit darker in tone compared to this Okey Dokeys. And then I've also got a Bernat blanket shade here, which is the color gold, which is almost a direct dupe there. They're looking like identical in color. If anything, this one looks a little bit different because the texture of the yarn is different, but overall very, very similar color there. So there are 3 different colors to compare. Next up, we have Okey Dokeys Red, which is a pretty basic red color. It's not as like bright and vibrant as some of the reds that Premier Parfait Chunky offers, but it's a little bit more similar to some of the reds that I see coming from Bernat. I think it's kind of like just like a basic yellow color, which is great to have in a line of different colored yarns. Then we have Okey Dokeys selection of green yarns here, and I actually love one of these colors, and they're all just really great greens to be honest. But first off, we have like this sage green color that's almost like a little bit minty too, so not quite a sage, but I really, really like this color and enjoy it a lot. I will pull out some possible dupes for this color in just a little bit after I show you guys these other 2 greens. So we have this green here, which is really similar to Premier Parfait's neon green color, I think. It's probably not as vibrant and bright as theirs, but it is pretty close to that green color. If not, it might also be kind of similar to the color Goblin in the Premier Parfait Chunky line. And they also just came out with a new color called Pistachio, but I don't have either of those right now because I'm completely out, but I'm pretty sure it's a nice like comparison to those colors as well. Not like a dupe, but it's probably in that same kind of color range there. And then finally we have this really bright green, if not yellow, like highlighter color, which kind of reminds me of Glow Warm by Big Twist Posh, which I think I have some of. So let me grab some of these dupes here and I'll show you them. All right, so starting off with this muted green color that I really love. I could not find a direct dupe for this, but I have some somewhat similar colors from Premier yarns. So first off, we have this color here, which is definitely a lot darker, but it's similar in tone to this green. It's just darker. This is actually some chenille yarn that I got from their Stash Goals selection. It's like unlabeled. It doesn't tell you what it's from. But it's the exact same color as their Parfait Chunky XL or Parfait XL Sage color. That is the same color there. So pretty similar to Sage, but darker. And then I also have this, which is definitely not a dupe. As you can see, it's a lot cooler toned, but this is from one of the Gumdrop chenille skeins from Premier Parfait, Premier Yarns. I always want to say Parfait whenever I say Premier, but definitely not a dupe there either. But this sage color is pretty similar to that Okey Dokeys color. Then for this green, I also mentioned earlier that it may be closer to Pistachio or Goblin in tone from the Premier Parfait Chunky line, but I don't have either of those right now. But what I do have is Premier Parfait Chunky Neons. That is almost exact match. This one's definitely a lot brighter and more vibrant, like I was saying, and this one's like a little bit more duller in overall appearance. If you're wanting like a less really vibrant like neon highlighter color green, then this one's definitely the one you should probably reach for. But like I was saying, I can't speak to Goblin or Pistachio right now in the Premier Parfait Chunky line just because I don't have those in stock right now. And then for this neon green color, almost like yellow color, I couldn't find an exact dupe for this, but I did find some similar colors. So first off, I mentioned Big Twist. I will show you that in a second, but I found this neon yellow from Premier Parfait Chunky. Same deal. It's a lot more vibrant and bright than the Okey Dokeys. But the one that is a lot closer in color, maybe this one is a little bit more like yellow in tone than this, but this is Glow Warm by Big Twist Posh, I believe, and it's pretty similar. There's definitely a tone difference there. This one has a lot more yellow, maybe like a little bit more orange in it as well, whereas this one's maybe like a lot more green. But there are our comparisons for this green shade, or maybe it's a yellow. Let me know in the comments if you think this is green or yellow. We have one more green that almost reads as gray to me, which is why I didn't show it to y'all when I initially was grabbing my greens. But here it is. It's more like of a dark, like shady moss color, not like that vibrant green moss that you see sometimes, but maybe like a dingy, like kind of almost, I don't know, sea foam or seaweed or something like that. And it almost reads as gray to me, especially on camera. When I'm looking at it on camera, it does look like a dark gray, almost like in the middle of the road kind of gray, but it does have a little tinge of green to it. So that's why I kind of left it out of the green category. It just doesn't read as green to me, especially when they're side by side. I can't really tell that this is supposed to be green, but I will let you know on screen what the color name is and if it has any reflection of green in the title. Next up, we have our blues. There's 3 different shades of blue, and they're definitely not like beside each other on the color wheel. They're not like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. They're different shades of blue, and some have more purple in them than others. So starting off with the, I don't even know if this would be the lightest shade or if these two would be like parallel to each other, but we've got like this blue and this blue, which have definitely, this one's got a lot more purple in it than this one does, maybe a little bit more yellow in this one. So yeah, different shades of blue there. Not sure which one would rank lighter than the other one. And then the darkest shade of blue here is like this almost like midnight blue. A lot more purple in this one as well, so it seems like almost as we're stepping up like darker and darker in the shade range, we just add more red or purple to those colors to make them slightly different in tone overall. And I probably do have some dupes for each of these. Let me quickly pull them out. So starting out with the yarns that I have the fewest dupes for right now, starting with this dark navy blue, I have this color right here, which is just the color navy in Premier Parfait Chunky. Obviously not an exact match, but pretty close. This one's a little bit more purple than this one is. Then for this shade of blue, I thought the color Cornflower in Premier Parfait Chunky is a pretty close match, but this one is obviously a little bit lighter than that one, so definitely slightly different in color as well. All right, and then we have the lightest, less purple shade of blue than the rest of them, and I have quite a few different yarns to compare this one to. So starting out, we've got this color right here, which I believe is called Seaside by Premier Parfait Chunky. Obviously not an exact match, but same kind of tone, just a little bit lighter. And then we've got this one right here, which is pretty close. I believe this color is either Azure by Premier Parfait Chunky or it is Rock Candy. At one point, Rock Candy just came out as like one of their new releases, but before it was fully released, they did like a limited edition version of Rock Candy. So I think that's what this might be. I could be wrong though. I think Rock Candy might be like a little bit darker. So it may be Azure, but it's one of those two, and it's pretty dang close to the actual color that we're seeing here. And then finally, I have a skein of Big Twist, and I'm not sure what the color this is, but it is Posh, and that one's obviously a little bit darker as well. So we've got some similar skeins here, but I definitely think that this Azure or Rock Candy one, whichever that is actually, is the closest one to a dupe that I have. Now transitioning into purple, there is one purple skein, which is this one right here. I'm gonna quickly take a gander around my room. I do not think I have any purples like this right now. Yeah, I think most of the purples that I have more blue tone in them than red or pink tones. So this one is definitely a unique color that I don't have myself, but I'm sure there are more colors out there like this from brands that I don't currently have in my possession. Then we've got two skeins in the pink range of colors. We've got this light pink that looks a lot like Ballet Pink by Premier Parfait Chunky. And then we've got like almost a bubblegum pink, which I don't think I have any bubblegum pink from Premier Parfait Chunky, but this is pretty close to what that actually looks like, I think. But let me grab that Ballet Pink so that I can show you. Okay, so it turns out I don't have any Ballet Pink right now, but I'll show you the other dupes that I have. They're not as exact of a match. So here is the Okey Dokeys color. I have this Just Chenille by Premier that I got from Dollar Tree. It's like a little bit more velvety than this one is, and obviously a little bit more muted and darker toned pink than this one. So not a match. We've also got this right here, which is pretty close. This is Premier Retro Velvet, and I think it might actually be Ballet Pink, but I'm not 100% sure. But that is their pink color, and this is really comparable to the Ballet Pink that they offer. So that one's a pretty close match. I'll keep that held up for y'all while I show you the others. Next, from Premier, we have this, which is Gumdrop Chenille in the light pink color. Pretty close, but a lot lighter. So let's put that one away. And then finally, we have this pink color here, which is from Big Twist. So pretty similar to that velvet color as well. On camera, it looks pretty similar. However, in person, this one is definitely a lot more yellow toned, and it just looks slightly different. I can't really place why, but I think these two are probably the closest right here, which is surprising with this being a velvet and this one just being like a chenille. But if I were to guess, if I had any Ballet Pink right now by Premier Parfait Chunky, they would be almost identical. Then finally, the last skein that I have is black, and this one is definitely your like run-of-the-mill basic black. I know that I say that, but at the same time, a lot of blacks have different color tones to them. Some come across a lot more red, some come across a lot more blue than others. So there's definitely a lot of different tones of black, but this is my only comparison right now for true black right now. It's Premier Parfait Chunky. And as you can see, this one appears to be a lot darker, and it is a lot darker in person as well. Premier Parfait Chunky always, their blacks look a lot more silky than like Bernat type yarns do, just because of the overall texture of the yarn being feathery, and it looks a little tiny bit velvety in person too. So there is that color comparison for you. But anyway, that is our haul of yarns from Okey Dokeys now. So let's go ahead and take a look at the different tests and different comparisons I have in store for these yarns to give a true review of these yarns and let you know my opinion. So first up, I really want to do a magic ring test. Typically when I'm working with chenille yarns, I do everything I can to avoid doing a magic ring, just because a lot of the time the yarn gets stuck when you pull it, or the yarn breaks when you pull it, and it's just a lot more difficult to work with than when you're working with like a worsted weight yarn, acrylic yarn, cotton yarn, those types of yarns. So that is why I really want to try out doing a magic ring. And I know that's something on Okey Dokeys social media as well as their website. Something they really brag about is the durability of their yarn and how easy it is to break it. In fact, they did like a breakage test on their yarn on their Instagram that I saw, where they were trying so hard to break the yarn, but they basically couldn't. They were able to finally, but they had to do so much to get it to break. So we will also try to do a little bit of a breakage test when doing that magic ring, just to see how durable this yarn is. In addition to a magic ring test, we're also going to be looking at how much this yarn sheds, because another thing that they brag and boast about on their website and on their social media is just that they wanted to create a yarn that doesn't shed and like make you sneeze and stuff when you're working with it, because of all of the fallout that you get working with it. I know that's definitely something that a lot of people complain about when they work with Premier Parfait Chunky. That's why they don't want to work with it, is because there is so much shedding and fallout when working with it. But it really comes down to your preferences, obviously, and experience with working with that yarn too. Will make shedding less of an issue. But I know that that is definitely something that people really care about when picking out the yarn that they work with, and that is probably also why Big Twist is so popular, because it doesn't shed. So we're going to be looking at how much this yarn sheds compares to other yarns. Another thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with it in amigurumi style versus like flat crochet style, to see how it works up, see how different techniques hold up with that yarn. And all of those tests should hopefully give you a good idea of how this yarn works up and how good it is, if it's worth your money. And at the end of this video, I'm going to be rating it out of 5 stars, how I feel for the price that you're paying, as well as just the overall quality of the yarn, and give you my opinion of if I will be buying it again or trying it out again. Another thing that is really important when looking at yarns too, that we'll be talking about, is just like the overall range of colors and different yarn sizes that they offer as well. Obviously in this video we're only looking at one yarn size, but we got basically the entire color range that they offer, I think. So it'll be a good idea of what this specific yarn has to offer in the overall color range. So let's go ahead and start looking at the yarn closer and get a good idea of what this yarn really looks like compared to other yarns.
Hey guys, so let's take a closer look at this Okey Dokeys skein of chenille yarn. Upon first glance, we have a bit of a center pole here to get the start of the yarn, but the yarn isn't situated in the center of the yarn like some yarn skeins are. It's unwound from the outside. Upon examining the strand of yarn initially, it looks like it's a strand of chenille that's wrapped around a center piece of string. There is minimal shedding, but let's go ahead and cut a little bit off and see if we have any issues with additional shedding when we trim the yarn. It looks like there's a little bit more chenille coming off and shedding, but it's kind of hard to get this to shed more. But let's take a look at a couple more of these skeins to see if it was just the blue skein that's like that, or if it's inconsistent. Right away I'm noticing that this orange skein sheds quite a bit more than that blue one initially. I'm trimming it again to see if we can get any more shedding that is inconsistent with the blue one, and it looks like it's not wanting to shed much at all. Here's a closer look at that strand just to see the overall texture of this yarn, and I'm pulling a little bit more to see if the shedding is any worse than we initially thought. And it looks like the center strand came loose, and now the chenille is shedding like crazy because that center strand isn't secure. And the more that I pull on this, the more chenille comes off of this strand of yarn, which is really unfortunate, and it's reminding me a lot of the Burya chenille yarn that I've been trying to get rid of for nearly a year now, that I don't like working with. Let's go ahead and take a look at this tan khaki shade of Okey Dokey yarn as well and see if we get a similar issue here. Upon first glance, there is a little bit of shedding, and then look, oh, that's really unfortunate. The center strand came loose again, and the chenille is coming off like crazy when you pull this center strand. All of it comes off like crazy. The more you pull this center strand, the more the chenille takes off, and you could honestly pull this until you're through the entire skein of yarn and all of that chenille would come off. There's no stopping in sight, so to make it stop, you have to trim the yarn and then just hope for the best, hope that you're not going to pull it loose again. So, like I was saying, it reminded me a lot of this Burya chenille. So the yarn on the right here in the big cake is Burya chenille, and the yarn on the left is obviously Okey Dokeys. So here is a side-by-side comparison. The Burya is obviously a lot thicker, but as we can see here, it doesn't want to shed as much as this Okey Dokeys does. When you initially are pulling on the yarn, no, there's not any chenille shedding. But we're going to go ahead and trim this right now and see how that compares once we have a fresh cut of the yarn. So right away, this Burya chenille, you can see that the center strand is exposed here, and when you pull on that center strand, the same thing is happening as was happening with the Okey Dokeys yarn. But with this Okey Dokeys yarn, if we try to replicate the same issue and you pull on that center strand, it just goes on and on and on and never really wants to stop. But it's the same kind of construction of these two yarns, just different weights. So then I went ahead and I pulled out this Big Twist Posh yarn, and I'm going to compare it side by side. As you can see on the right here, we've got Big Twist Posh, and it looks pretty similar. Yarn weight is overall smaller than the Okey Dokeys yarn, and when I'm pulling on it, there is a little tiny bit of shedding and fibers that come off of the yarn strand, but it does have an end point. There is a center strand underneath all the chenille, but there's a limit to how much chenille can be pulled off, and I'm pulling pretty hard here, and it's pretty stubborn about wanting to come off. So that is a major difference that I'm seeing right off the bat. You can pull pretty hard on this Okey Dokeys yarn, and when you pull a little bit too hard, that center strand gets exposed, and obviously this chenille shedding issue is a big red flag to me that I'm seeing happen again and again. And I'm trying to replicate the same issue on this Big Twist yarn, and I'm not seeing that happen at all. It's really stubborn, it doesn't want to move, and that center strand doesn't want to come loose. Now I'm going to test if you can make a magic ring successfully with this yarn. I've heard that you don't really have to do a chain two to work with this yarn, which is really nice. So instead of doing my typical chain two method to start a Amigurumi plushie, I'm just going to use my magic ring and create 6 single crochets into the magic ring and then pull it closed and see how this yarn performs. So as you can see here, I've completed 6 single crochets into this magic ring, and I'm slip stitching closed. I did, when I was pulling the magic ring closed, did have a little bit of difficulty getting the ring to close just because of that texture of the yarn, but overall it was a pretty easy process, and the center is closed fully.
Hey y'all, so I have finished working with the Okey Dokeys yarn, and I have some things to show you. So first off, I made a swatch, a little 5x4 in single crochet, a little square of each of the yarn colors so that you can kind of get an idea of how big it works up to be, as well as just like what the color looks like when it's worked in the row. So I've gone ahead and sorted these swatches out in like brighter tones to middle tones to the darkest tones, just so that you can see the stitch definition on each of these swatches and how it differs depending on what kind of color you're using. So here are our lightest swatches. As you can see, the stitch definition on them is pretty clear. You can see the full single crochets on each of these stitches, and where the rows divide, it's very clear to see, and the slip stitches around the outside of the squares are also very clear and easy to see as well. Really nice stitch definition on these. Then for the brighter colors, I'm seeing the same thing. It's almost more apparent to see like those full stitches and the slip stitches. You can see the total outline of each stitch and where the stitch begins and ends, so it's really easy to see your stitches on these swatches as well. Then when we start looking at the middle of the range tones, it's a little bit more difficult to see each stitch clearly. It's a little bit fuzzier to see the full outlines of the stitches, as well as just like that overall lightness, and that they're not as vibrant makes those stitches just a little bit more difficult to see overall, and it kind of gets muddled a little bit. Then when we're looking at our darkest tones, it is even a little bit more difficult to see, especially with the black. It's hard to see those stitches, where they start and begin, and where the slip stitches overlap with the single crochets is also really difficult to see. I'm seeing the same thing with the dark brown and a little bit with the dark blue as well. But overall, stitch definition looks pretty decent for this yarn texture overall. So after I made my swatches of each of the different colors that I purchased, I went ahead and started working on some Amigurumi plushies in the typical size that I would work a keychain in. Being that this yarn is a little bit bigger than the typical keychains that I make using a 5mm hook or a 4.5mm hook, this yarn I was working with a 5.5mm hook for all of the different projects that I worked with, and I was noticing it's just a little bit bigger than I'm typically used to seeing with these keychain sized projects. So starting with the plushie that is the biggest in terms of these keychain size plushies is this little Mallard here. This is probably a little bit too big for me to sell as a keychain. I would probably just price this in like my $8 range and sell it in that section of my shop and not ever put a keychain on this, just because I feel like when people see a keychain about this size, they probably won't pick it up, or they'll ask to have the keychain removed. And that's just because of the overall size. It's just like a little bit too big to be considered a keychain. And then I also made it in the pattern that is my best seller in the keychains. It is this tiny chicken pattern. This is also a little bit bigger than I typically would sell these keychains for. The keychains in comparison to this chicken right here are probably about a third smaller, and that is like a great size for those keychains. So I would probably sell this as a mini chicken, just as I would sell this Mallard in that $8 range, because it's more likely to be picked up as a individual plushie instead of a keychain, just because of the size being a little bit too large for a keychain. And then I ended up making a pattern that is actually the smallest keychain that I offer. I always make it in velvet yarn, which I usually use with a 3.5mm hook or a 4mm hook, just because of how small it can be. And those keychains come about this size, little tiny bee keychains. But with this yarn, it comes out a bit bigger, probably 2 or 3 times as big as those keychains. So overall, I think this pattern would be the most keychainable out of all 3 of these little patterns that I typically use for keychains. But I still wouldn't feel super comfortable making a bunch of these and adding key rings to them to make them keychains, just because of the overall yarn size. It's just a little bit too big to be in my comfort zone of making it a keychain. But I still see some people making keychains around this size or even bigger sometimes, especially when you think about the Labubus that are really popular right now. Those are like the size of like my $10 plushies, if not a little bit bigger. So it really depends on what you want for a keychain. Some people like bigger keychains, some people just want it to be very small, or they might not even consider them keychains, they might consider them bag charms. So those are some things to keep in account. But I really wanted to try out this pattern with the smallest patterns that I have available that I typically sell as keychains, to give you guys an idea of what it looks like when you're trying to make it work for a keychain size yarn. So after those smaller amigurumi projects, I ended up doing a full-size amigurumi project to see how the yarn worked up, and here is what I made. I made this Lanky Klown pattern, and obviously I had to do a lot of striping to use an adequate amount of yarn. I had to change up the colors in areas where I normally wouldn't change up the colors. For example, this patch underneath the hat here, it would typically be the same color as the head, as well as I had to change the color of the head near the neck area to accommodate for lack of yarn being available because of these 1 ounce skeins just not offering up enough yarn to create a full amigurumi plushie. But that isn't what we're really concerned about when we're looking at this here. We're really looking at the overall size of this large plushie, and these Lanky Klown plushies typically come out to about this size, maybe about a third smaller, just because of the overall yarn weight being a little bit larger than what I use when making this size project. The overall stitch definition is really nice when looking at this project. You can see those stitches really clearly. They're nice and puffy, nice to look at. They don't get muddled because the yarn is too like feathery or fluffy or anything like that. You can really see and appreciate all of those stitches. When you have color changes, there is a little bit of peek through, but that is typical with most kinds of yarns. I like the tops of the color changes, that they look like little spikes. That's also pretty typical with color changes overall when working with any type of chenille yarn. Another thing that I really like about this yarn, especially when working with a project like this, is typically I'm getting a lot more head saggage when working with this project, just because the neck is so long. You can't really see it underneath this little ruffle that I made, but the neck is about this long total. So typically this head wants to sag a lot more, but because of how sturdy and weighty this yarn is, I'm not seeing as much of that at all. So that is very nice as well. I also love the different colors that I used. The overall color selection is really nice here. I love the different combinations of like having lighter muted tones with the brighter tones, and I really think it brings out like this kind of Halloween-esque project, and I think it'll be very nice for market when I'm going to my October markets this year. So really cute project overall. I also really enjoy how heavy this feels too, because typically when people are picking up larger plushies, I feel like if they weigh a little bit more, it also adds a little bit more attention, because maybe if they're cuddling with them, it'll maybe feel like a weighted blanket, things like that. So those are all things to really consider as well when working with this yarn. And I didn't really have any issues, except for when I would cut my yarn. Sometimes if the shedding was a little bit too much, it would start unraveling the entire strand and I would have to cut it again. So that was the main thing that I was seeing and was a little bit annoyed with when working with this yarn, especially when adding a yarn needle to the yarn onto that strand. Sometimes that would happen when trying to pull the yarn through, just because the yarn needles that I'm working with don't have an eye that is as big as I would probably recommend working with this size of yarn. It's also just a little bit easier to pull apart when you're pinching it through like that and having to pull really hard to get that yarn through the eye of the needle. So finally, I also wanted to make a non-amigurumi project in this video with this yarn, just to give you guys an idea of what the yarn looks like when we're working with it in a different case scenario. So I made this bucket hat here. Obviously we striped it again just so that we would have enough yarn to finish the project, and I really like how it turned out, especially the rim of this bucket hat. It has a lot of structure to it and it sticks out a lot more than when I work with a different size of yarn, maybe like Big Twist, or if when I work with Premier Parfait Chunky. Doing this same project, it also takes a lot longer because I have to make more rows before I can finish the project. This one I had to cut the rows back by about 2 or 3 rows overall because the length was already at the right length before I got to a few rounds before it was supposed to start creating the hat brim. So if I hadn't removed some of those extra rows, it would have been too long and it would have covered my eyes. So here is what it looks like on my head. It's nice and snug, really cute. I really like the hat brim, like I was saying, a little bit of ruffly texture here, but also if you look at under the hat brim, it's also really nice. It doesn't have any weird issues on the back of the stitches that would make it like look more ugly or not as nice to look at. Seeing the bottom of that hat brim, as you can see on the inside here as well, it's nice on the inside. Didn't really have any issues with hiding strands of yarn when I would switch colors, cut the yarn and switch colors, hide those strands in there. And as you can see, the color changes look really nice, especially since with this project specifically, since I was striping it, I chose to, instead of at the end of each round when you're working with amigurumi, you don't slip stitch into the first stitch of the row that you're finishing. Instead, when you're working with amigurumi, you kind of work in a spiral and you don't do any slip stitching. But with this project, because I was doing the striping like this, and because it's a hat and you need it to end in a full circle instead of in a spiral, I chose to do those slip stitches into the first stitch of each round just so that we had a really concise end to each round, and it looks really beautiful. I don't see any issues with the seam of the first round at all. In fact, it's kind of hard to find it. I think the first stitch of each round starts about here, and as you can see, it sticks out a little bit, but it's not super obvious. You can also see that it kind of dips down a little bit, like it's a little bit V-shaped where the start of that round starts, but it's not super obvious, and I don't think that that's an issue that this yarn has at all. So that is also a plus to working with this yarn. So yeah, I really enjoyed working with this yarn. The only real downside of using this yarn that I noticed was something that I also don't like when using Bergia Chenille Yarn, which is a cheaper yarn that I got from Amazon about 1 or 2 Christmases ago. I got like the whole selection of all of those yarn colors in a bundle as a Christmas gift, and I wanted to try them out, see if that was worth the money and see if that was worth pursuing in the future. Some things that I don't like about that yarn that reminded me of this yarn is just when you cut the yarn, sometimes the end will fray and all of the fluff of the yarn strand will come off, and it just seems to never stop doing that until you cut it again. And even when you cut it again, sometimes it might happen again, and it really just comes down to how hard you're pulling that strand to determine if that will happen. Something that this brand kind of brags about when they're mentioning like the durability, not really shedding as a problem, is just how hard it is to break this yarn. As you can see here, I'm not pulling as hard as I possibly can, but this is the main selling point for the yarn, is that it just doesn't want to break. I think I could definitely break it if I really tried, but I'd probably have to pinch off a little bit of the circulation in my fingers to do that, so I'm not going to do that. But it just goes to show how durable this yarn is. Obviously, when I'm pulling it, you can see the fibers kind of spread apart, which is good that they have some flexibility to them, in that there's not any like tendency for the fibers to come apart entirely and for gaps to form in between the fibers like you see with like Premier Parfait Chunky or anything like that. But even as I'm trying to spread those fibers apart right here, it is really hard to see any fibers splitting apart or causing any gaps on this strand of yarn. Also, something that I want to mention is that it was really easy to work this in a magic ring if you choose to do that instead of the chain 2 method when working with your chenille yarn. Chain 2 is something that I still prefer to do myself just because I feel like it wastes less yarn and it's pretty secure as it is, and I'm pretty good at getting that so that there's no gap in the first row that you might see if you're not familiar with doing a chain 2, but I don't typically see that. But if you do prefer doing a magic ring, it is possible to do it with this without the yarn snapping. So now I'm going to show you some different yarn differences that I noticed between this yarn and some of my favorite yarns, starting with Premier Parfait Chunky in red, and then obviously this Okey Dokey yarn is in pink. So looking down here at my cabinet, we've got the Okey Dokey yarn, and here is a closer look at what I was talking about really quickly. You have this center strand of yarn, and when you pull on it, once this is loose, you can see that chenille is coming off, and it's really easy to detach it when that happens. It just slides right off, and you can keep sliding it off as long as you keep pulling this. I'm not a huge fan of that, and it's specifically because whenever this happens, it seems to happen when I'm working with my yarn needle, trying to pull it through the eye of that needle, and then this keeps happening, and at that point I only have about this much yarn left over, and it makes it really hard to sew my ends in or sew holes closed when this happens. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that. In comparison, Premier Parfait Chunky has a similar problem, but it's not as severe as this in my opinion. So as you can see here, this is that center strand of the yarn that I was talking about, and if you pinch some of this chenille off that's in the end, it'll slide off really easily. But if you don't pull this center strand, that's not going to cause any issues for the chenille left on this strand of yarn. So that is why I'm a bigger fan of Premier Parfait Chunky overall. This kind of thing doesn't happen, and this happens really easily, and I see the same thing happening with Burya Chenille, and that kind of shows me that it's kind of a cheap brand of yarn, and I'm not a huge fan of that construction of these skeins. So the nice thing about Premier Parfait Chunky, when this happens, I still have this strand that's sticking out without the chenille, and it's still really sturdy and doesn't break at any point. It doesn't detach any more chenille. In fact, whenever I cut my strand of Premier Parfait Chunky, I normally tug some of this chenille off so that I have this bit here and it's safe and none of that chenille is going to continue falling off. But with Okey Dokeys, when this happens, if I was to trim this, say I trim it here, right before that break is happening, and I go to pull this through the eye of the needle with the little tiny bit that's hanging out through the needle. So let me get a needle and just show you what I'm talking about. Here is my needle, and the eye is more than big enough for that to pull through. So let me line it up and show you. If I'm, let's just take off this little bit of shedding here and give it a chance. Pull it through the eye of the needle. I'm flattening it between my middle finger and thumb so that it can squeeze through there, and I'm pushing it through. If I were to grab this before pushing it through further, that unraveling thing would happen again if I were to tug too hard on this end. So if I was to tug here, it would create that issue all over again, and then it would keep pulling that, and that is what I hate about this yarn. I know it's kind of user error. It's definitely the same thing as Premier Parfait Chunky, where just knowing how the yarn works definitely helps you in improving and learning how to use it better in the future. So what I've had to do when using this yarn is just make sure that I push through from the opposite end before I end up grabbing this side and pulling it through, and then that doesn't happen. But that is still something that is really annoying to work with, and I'm seeing the identical issue happen with the Burya Chenille that I don't like so much. So let me grab that and show you as well. So now I've got this Burya Chenille in blue. I'm going to find the end of it and show you closer up on camera how this compares to the Okey Dokey in pink. So as you can see, this yarn looks pretty similar to the Okey Dokey, except it's larger in yarn weight. So just side by side, it's at least a third bigger in yarn weight compared to the Okey Dokey yarn. But when we look at it, the same way we were just looking at the Okey Dokey, if you were to pinch this off at the end, you're seeing the same thing happen, where that center strand, if you pull on it, it's actually not happening as severely as it does with the Okey Dokeys, which is kind of crazy to think about, because this is cheaper yarn than Okey Dokey. It wants to pull and continue pulling until the strand comes off, but on this Burya chenille, it's actually stopping. With the Okey Dokey yarn, as I was showing you earlier, let me replicate the issue again. Pinching off the chenille here. It looks like this end is not having that issue. But this end, yep, there's the issue again. So when you pull on that strand, it just continues happening and it never stops happening. And just to show you that I'm not doing any tricks to make this happen, grabbing that Burya again. I'm holding hardly any tension at all here. Not going to be pinching it to try to create any issues. I'm going to hold it so that it doesn't slide out of my hand as I pull. But look, no issues there. I'm trying to show that I'm being completely honest about this. I'm not pulling with any tension with these two fingers right here. All the tension is up here. These fingers are just holding it in place so that I can tug on it to create the same issue. But the Okey Dokey yarn, let me clip it again just to show you once more. We're gonna clip it here before the issue. And then we're gonna, I'm holding it really gently with my left hand, pulling with hardly any force at all with my right hand actually. But whenever I pinch with my nails, it creates this issue, and it's not consistent throughout all the skeins, but consistency is really important when it comes to yarn. As you can see, this end is not an issue. When I pull on it here, it's not coming off. Similar to that Burya yarn, it's not creating the same issue as this side of the yarn. So let me find the other side of this Burya skein so I can see if that is similar. So I've pulled out the center here. I'm going to find the other end of this yarn strand to see if that is the issue here. If it's just like one side of the strand of yarn versus the other that makes that issue so apparent. So, so here is that end. Here's the end that didn't want to pull like the Okey Dokeys is pulling. I've got the center strand out on this one does not. So like I was saying, this is the center strand that doesn't want to pull on the Burya, and this is the opposite side. So let's see if we can replicate the issue. Pulling, pinching, trying to get that center strand out. Okay, we've got the center strand and I'm pulling on it and nothing is happening. So this Burya chenille is actually a little bit better quality, but when I work with this Burya chenille, I'm still seeing the same issues and consistency where some of the skeins have a bigger problem, like this pink yarn does from Okey Dokeys, where it sheds a lot more when that issue does happen. And I'm seeing the same inconsistency when working with Okey Dokeys. Different skeins pull a lot more like that one does and unravel a lot more like that one does, where other skeins are completely fine. So I'm not sure why that happens, if the manufacturers are messing up or what that is, but it definitely is really annoying when that happens. And seeing the difference between like my favorite yarn and the one that I kind of hold as a standard of like excellence and having my favor and being really easy to work with once you get past the initial hiccups of that yarn. I'm just seeing that this Okey Dokey yarn is a lot more difficult to fix those issues and make sure that they don't keep happening, and also not seeing, I don't see as much yarn waste happening when working with Premier Parfait Chunky because the shedding doesn't happen so severely like this Okey Dokey yarn does. I also think it's fair that I also compare it to Big Twist Posh. This is one of my last skeins that I got before Joann's went out of business. As you can see, I haven't even opened or used this one. It's still in the original skein. So I'm gonna get a strand off of this one and show you how it compares to the Okey Dokeys strand. Obviously we can see the color difference. This is the Big Twist and the light pink will be the Okey Dokeys. All right, so here is Big Twist Posh, and this is the end of the skein. We do have a little bit of fallout here. That's typical with Big Twist Posh, that there is a little bit of fallout, but as you can see, once you find the center of this bit of yarn here, you can't pull it and remove anymore. It doesn't cause any issues. Very similar to the Premier Parfait Chunky, except this doesn't want to come off the center strand as much, which is why people really enjoy working with it and love it so much. Compared to Premier Parfait Chunky, if you pull really hard on this Posh one, obviously more chenille is going to come off, but it's not going to want to. With the Premier Parfait Chunky, it will just continue coming off as long as you slide it off the strand, especially if you're closer to the end of the strand, it'll want to come off even more. But overall, seeing these yarns side by side, let me trim off the excess here. Again, so we've got bright pink Big Twist Posh, Premier Parfait Chunky is the middle, and then Okey Dokeys. We can see there is a little bit of shedding initially. On first glance, not a lot of shedding, but if you pull the center strand, like I've been harping on over and over again, it is like an unlimited amount of shedding that happens. And even though it's really hard to get this to happen, obviously, it's not actually wanting to happen again right now, but it's because I don't have enough of that center strand exposed to cause an issue. But the fact that Okey Dokeys is claiming that it's not a shedding yarn is kind of disingenuous to me, especially with that much of an issue happening. If you cut it just right, or if that center strand becomes too exposed and you pull on it too hard, definitely feels a little bit disingenuous to me, and like they're not really telling the truth about how this yarn works and how much it will shed if you get it in the right area, or if you get one that is just like not as up to par in their manufacturing as other skeins that they might send you. So I'm glad I was able to show that comparison to you guys a little bit more close up and see and show you what I was seeing when I was working with the yarn, because I was definitely expecting much better from this yarn, especially with all the ads they put out about being a yarn that doesn't shed, that doesn't break, and seeing such a severe issue so inconsistently across the different skeins that I was sent in the same bundle order, where you assume that the consistency of the product that you would be getting would be spot on. It was just discouraging to me. And I'm glad that I was able to show you what I was seeing close up, like I was saying, and show how it compares to different yarns and how that shedding really compares, because in my opinion, this is more severe than what I see with some of the shedding that you see with Premier Parfait Chunky. I know that a lot of people really talk about Parfait Chunky as like being the worst example of shedding, and a lot of people aren't really a fan of it. But in my opinion, I feel like Premier Parfait Chunky is easy to work with once you understand how the yarn frays and sheds. And shedding is always going to be an issue no matter what yarn you're working with it. Obviously, when I was cutting each of these yarns, you could see that all of them fray a little bit, all of them shed a little bit. So it should be expected that if you're working with a chenille yarn, it is gonna shed. So overall, I liked the yarn, but it's definitely not my favorite, and because it reminds me of Bruyere chenille a lot, and that's a yarn that I've been actively trying to get rid of because I dislike it so much, it's probably gonna be one that I will rate lower just because of the overall workability of that yarn and how much I already dislike it. On top of the fact that these skeins, when you're buying a full-size skein instead of the little 1-ounce skeins that I purchased, they are about $9 each, which is a little bit steep and a little bit pricey for a yarn of this type and how much you're getting. When you're purchasing Premier Parfait Chunky, a 3.5-ounce skein of yarn is $4.99, and that is full price before any discounts or anything. This skein of yarn, if you're purchasing it full price, you're getting a little bit less for a lot more money, almost double the amount of money that you're paying for Premier Parfait Chunky. Then in comparison to like Big Twist Posh, or as they call it now, Loops and Threads Posh Pearl. Let me pull out one of those skeins. I actually don't have any Posh Pearl left over that doesn't have the skein wrapper on it. So I have Cozy Cub, but that's fine because it's the same amount of yarn and the same price. This is 7 ounces of yarn and these cost $10. So this gives you about double what you're getting when you purchase a Okey Dokeys skein of yarn. And also it's a different yarn weight, obviously, so it's not a direct comparison, but you're going to see a lot less fallout. It's going to be a lot more keychainable if you're looking for yarn that can be made into smaller plushies that you can make into keychains. And it's also just going to be a better price and a better value for what you're paying. In addition to that, the color range that they offer isn't exactly my cup of tea. There's not like a whitest white. As you can see from the color range that we purchased in this bundle that we got off Amazon for a discounted price for smaller skeins of yarn, obviously, it was actually not, there wasn't a true white in the bundle that we purchased, and when looking at their yarns online, it looks like they do have a true white, so it's possible that they meant to send me a true white in the bundle, but I just didn't get it, and one of them got swapped out for a different color that I already had. That is very possible, but I didn't get to review the true white because it wasn't included in this bundle, and I just thought that was a little weird because typically when you get a bundle, like a starter pack, like this came with yarn needles, a crochet hook, some stitch markers as well, and typically when you're looking at like a beginner's bundle, you would truly have that black color and the white color, but obviously we're not rating the bundle itself, but Okey Dokeys as a yarn collection. And with all that being said, I think I would have to rate this about 3 out of 5. I see some potential benefits in it, in the weight overall being like a in between Bernat sized yarn, which is what I typically work with when I see this type of yarn texture, and in a Big Twist or Premier Parfait Chunky size yarn. It's like in between those yarn weights, which is pretty cool. So if you're looking for something like that, this is potentially for you. However, the disadvantages that I see with like the shedding, as well as just not being able to make keychains with this size yarn is definitely something that reduces the overall rating, unfortunately. And like I was saying, it's just not my cup of tea. You may feel differently, and if you do, definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you've tried it and you like it, I am open to hearing other opinions, and maybe you can convince me otherwise to see better of this yarn brand and maybe purchase it in the future. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and comment down below what yarn you think I should review next. Obviously, there are yarns that I work with constantly that I probably won't be reviewing because I feel like I've given my opinion on those thoroughly enough that you all already know what I'm thinking about when it comes to like Premier Parfait Chunky, Big Twist Posh, and Baby Bear, Bernat Blanket. But if there are newer yarn brands that you see, or like yarn brands from overseas or anything like that that you see that you want me to try out because I haven't tried them out, or you're thinking about trying them out yourself, definitely let me know which ones you want to see in future review videos in the comment section below. That would be very helpful for me when coming up with new episodes of this video here in this video series. I'm definitely going to be looking at trying out Premier Parfait Chunky Plush because that is supposed to be an in-between yarn size between their XL and their Parfait Chunky as well, I believe, and it may have a different texture, a little bit more similar to what we're used to with Big Twist Posh and Baby Bear as well. And that is definitely something I'm interested in trying out. So let me know if that interests you, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!